He didn't know anyone was watching. But when a homeless man gave away his last dollar, cameras caught what happened next, and it will restore your faith in humanity. New York City was awake, roaring with its usual chaos. Taxi horns cutting through the air, impatient footsteps echoing off towering glass walls, and the endless rhythm of vendors shouting, music playing, and streetlights buzzing. In the middle of it all, where thousands of people brushed shoulders without ever looking up, Jacob sat quietly against the cold brick wall of a deli on 42nd Street. His face was pale, weathered, and roughened by years of surviving outdoors, his scruffy beard curling beneath a faded knit cap that had seen too many winters. A chipped coffee mug sat beside him, half filled with loose change from hurried strangers, and a small cardboard sign lay across his knees. The words, written carefully in black marker, said simply, "Trying to get back on my feet. Anything helps." Jacob was 48. Once, he'd had a decent job, a modest apartment in Queens, and people he called friends. But a layoff led to late bills. Late bills turned into eviction. And one bitterly cold night, the door to his old life slammed shut for good. That was 3 years ago. Since then, the city's sidewalks had become his bedroom, the alley behind a diner his closet, and the generosity of strangers his only source of survival. Today felt heavier than usual, though. Hunger clawed at his stomach, and the tips of his fingers ached from the biting November air. In his jacket pocket, pressed against his palm, was the last thing he had to his name, a single crumpled dollar bill. Across the street, a black sedan slowed to a stop. Inside sat Marcus, a 28-year-old from Brooklyn with a camera crew hidden in plain sight. He wasn't here by accident. For weeks, Marcus had been planning a social experiment, rigging discreet cameras to lampposts and crosswalks to capture raw moments of humanity. His idea was simple: pretend to be stranded without enough bus fare and see who, if anyone, would stop to help. Most people, he expected, would keep walking. After all, New York was a city where people avoided eye contact like it was contagious. But Marcus wasn't here for statistics. He was here to find something deeper. He stepped out of the car with a grocery bag tucked under his arm and approached the sidewalk, deliberately looking distracted, patting his jeans as if searching for missing cash. "Man, I don't have enough for my bus fare," he muttered softly, just loud enough to be overheard by passers-by. Dozens walked past without so much as a glance. A man in a suit brushed him off. A woman in heels rolled her eyes and hurried on. Within minutes, Marcus had been ignored by 15 different people. And then, quietly, Jacob looked up. At first, he hesitated, staring at the dollar clenched in his hand. It was supposed to be his lunch, maybe his only meal until tomorrow. But something about Marcus's voice cut through the noise. Slowly, Jacob stood, walked over, and without a word, held out his dollar. "Here," he whispered. Marcus blinked, stunned, pretending to protest, but Jacob gently pressed it into his hand. "You need it more than me." For a moment, time froze. The chaos of New York blurred into silence, replaced by the weight of a single decision. A homeless man giving away everything he had left. Marcus mumbled a soft thank you and walked away, his chest pounding beneath the weight of the cameras, knowing they had captured something extraordinary. But just as Jacob sat back down, something strange happened. From across the street, 2 men in black coats appeared, watching him closely, speaking into radios as they circled closer. Marcus froze behind the wheel of his car, whispering into his mic to his crew, "Keep rolling, something's happening." And then one of the men reached into his pocket. Jacob stiffened against the deli wall, his fingers curling around his chipped coffee mug as the 2 men approached. They were tall, dressed in dark coats, moving with a quiet authority that made his stomach twist. In New York, encounters like this rarely ended well. He'd been fined before for obstructing pedestrian traffic, been told to move along by cops who never looked him in the eye. He prepared himself for the usual humiliation. But this time, something felt different. The taller man knelt beside him and asked softly, "What's your name?" Jacob hesitated, unsure if answering would make things better or worse. Finally, he said, "Jacob." The man nodded and spoke into his earpiece, his words muffled. Marcus, watching from across the street through his car's rearview mirror, tensed, his mic live. Guys were staying on him. Don't cut. The second man pulled out a small white envelope and held it out. Jacob, he said quietly, this is for you. Confused, Jacob shook his head, pushing it back. I don't understand. But the man insisted, placing it firmly into his trembling hands before stepping back. Jacob unfolded the envelope and froze. Inside were crisp $100 bills, 5 of them. His breath hitched, his lips parting in disbelief as he clutched the envelope like it might vanish. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. The shorter man pointed discreetly toward Marcus's car across the street. Because you gave away the last thing you had, when you thought nobody was watching. Jacob turned slowly, his wide, glassy eyes locking on Marcus, who was now stepping out of the car with the cameras fully visible. It was only then Jacob understood. He had been part of something bigger than himself. But the cameras weren't the only thing watching. Across the street, a different set of eyes tracked the entire exchange. A tall figure leaning against a lamppost, smoking, his expression unreadable. Marcus didn't notice him. The crew didn't notice him. But Jacob did. The man crushed his cigarette, slipped into the alley, and disappeared. Marcus introduced himself with a warm smile. We've been filming a social experiment, he explained, his voice soft but full of gratitude. We wanted to see if kindness still exists, and you proved that it does. Jacob tried to speak but couldn't. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years, tears welled in his pale blue eyes. Before he could respond, the distant wail of sirens cut through the air, sharp and sudden, pulling Marcus's attention back toward the alley where the shadowed figure had vanished. Something wasn't right, and in the next 60 seconds, everything Jacob thought he knew about that day would change. The sirens grew louder as Marcus turned to his crew, motioning for them to keep rolling. Across the street, 2 NYPD cruisers screeched to a stop, doors slamming as officers jumped out and sprinted toward the alley. Shouts echoed between buildings, muffled and sharp, but Marcus couldn't hear enough to piece it together. Suddenly, the shadowed man from before emerged, handcuffed, escorted by 2 officers. As he passed, Jacob caught his face clearly this time, and recognition hit him like a punch. That man had been part of a small group that robbed him months ago while he was asleep under a bridge in Queens. He never thought he'd see him again. An officer stopped briefly, glancing at Jacob, then at Marcus. You should thank your friend here, he said, nodding toward Marcus. Our team's been tracking that guy for weeks. Your cameras just gave us exactly what we needed to link him to 3 assaults. Jacob sat frozen, trying to process it all, the dollar, the cameras, the envelope, and now this. In the chaos of Midtown Manhattan, his life had pivoted in the span of an hour. Marcus crouched beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. Listen, Jacob, he said softly. This isn't just about today. We've set up a fundraiser for you. Thousands of people are already watching your video. You're not invisible anymore. By the following morning, Jacob's story had gone viral. Millions watched his quiet act of compassion. A homeless man giving away his last dollar, expecting nothing, captured by cameras he didn't know were there. Donations poured in. Strangers sent clothes, food, and job offers. Marcus's experiment had started as a test of humanity, but it became something bigger. Proof that even in a city drowning in noise, small acts of kindness can cut through everything. A week later, Jacob stood inside a modest apartment Marcus helped him secure, clutching a set of keys he never thought he'd hold again. Tears lined his cheeks as he whispered, I thought nobody cared anymore. Marcus smiled and replied, Sometimes, Jacob, you just need one person to prove you wrong. And that day, a single crumpled dollar worth almost nothing changed 2 lives forever. If this story made you cry, smile, or believe in kindness again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.